Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Mine Wars Forum, brought to you by the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum. I'm Taylor, Communications Director for the museum. And if you didn't know, the museum is a people powered grassroots institution that educates and preserves a people's history of the coal wars, a bloody effort to unionize the southern coal fields of West Virginia at the turn of the 20th century. An industrial ailment that even afflicted some of the men that fought on Blair Mountain persists today. Black lung, a disease that has stolen so many lives too soon and disables coal miners in their prime, leaving people not only sick and out of work, but also with a legal battle to get the benefits they need to survive. Here with us today is a man that champions coal miners in that fight, Beckley-based lawyer Sam Petsonk. Thank you for joining us today, Sam.
Thank you, Taylor, for having me.
To set the scene for our discussion today, can you tell us what black lung is and how miners contract it?
Black lung is a layman's term for a range of lung diseases that miners can develop in the mines. They can develop traditional pneumoconiosis, which is a term that medically that they use for the disease is in the past and still today. That means scarring of the lung tissue. Basically, when you breathe too much dust, that dust gets into the fine uh, parts of your lung and it scrapes them up and scars them. And silica dust and coal dust together have a very toxic effect that can scar up your lungs very, very severely, as the lungs are basically always moving through, breathing in and breathing out um, throughout your life. Once you have foreign bodies in that lung, they're scraping up against the lungs every moment of every day. And the disease can progress to a very advanced state, even if you quit working around coal dust. It still continues to scratch at your lungs and worsen significantly in many cases over time. And then you can develop a whole other range of diseases: chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic bronchitis, um, occupational asthma from all the fumes and gases and things that you breathe in the mines. So all of that together is what we know as black lung, and it leaves miners' lungs in a really sorry state.
Many of my friends outside of the coal fields hear black lung and think of it as a historic disease eradicated with the progression out of the industrial era. And some people, even here in Appalachia, removed from those that work in the mines, think of it as an old man's disease. Not only does it still exist, but it's starting to affect a younger generation, correct?
Yes, and that has to do with a variety of factors in my experience. Let me tell you, I'm what I do as a lawyer. I'm sort of an organizer and a labor lawyer. I represent miners, both union and non-union miners, because there are sadly a lot of non-union miners around these days, and they're dying like flies on the job from black lung disease. It's just unconscionable what we are allowing to happen to working miners in this state. So I help them to use their grievance rights in non-union mines too, under the Federal Mine Act, to try reducing the most severe dust exposures in these non-union mines, especially. You have total outlaw mining. You have miners who are working downwind from the ventilation fans, from the ventilation structures. So instead of having a ventilation system that the mine workers have fought so hard for, that blows clean air towards the workers in a non-union mine, they're rushing and scrambling so fast to mine as much coal as possible. They force those guys to work downwind from the ventilation so that the airflow in the mine is blowing the dirty air off of the mining machine and downwind towards the poor guy who is trying to develop the next section. And so these non-union, illegal, rampant, and pervasive mining practices have a big role in the severity of the disease that we deal with now. But also, a second major factor that's compounding the severity of disease among young miners is a fact that we don't have as much coal in the eastern United States as we used to. And the coal seams that are still left over that we're mining today are very thin. We mined all the gravy, all the big, thick coal seams over the last 150 years. In order to mine a very thin coal seam, you've got to cut several feet of rock above and below the coal itself in order to fit your mining equipment into a tunnel that's big enough, to work in. And the sandstone that surrounds our coal in central Appalachia, especially, is highly toxic to the lungs, and it causes severe, acute, and often fatal silicosis, which is a part of the what we call black lung. Silica dust causes the same kind of scarring and like black lung and traditional pneumoconiosis. So you've got a lot of young miners working in totally illegal non-union conditions, breathing the most toxic type of rock dust, sandstone dust, silica dust. And it's just causing very young miners in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s to lose a quarter or more of their lung tissue. Sometimes half of their lung turns to essentially to ash because there's so much dust and there's so much scarring. And it's just heartbreaking, and we've got to stop it.
And once people have succumbed to these factors that you just described, is there a struggle to be officially diagnosed with pneumoconiosis? And have you experienced a hesitancy from people to even begin that diagnostic process?
Well, thanks to the union, the laws protecting coal miners in America are stronger than basically any other labor law for any other class of worker anywhere in the world. So American coal miners are no longer fearful, like many of their parents and grandparents were, that they will suffer retaliation or something like that from demanding basic health care for their disease. And I represent a lot of miners who are still working and who file partial disability claims under the workers' compensation system to get a little bit of medical care and support while they're still on the job, maybe prevent their disease from progressing as fast and get access to health, because we want them to keep working. The people value these jobs, and they are not ready to retire at the age of 28 or 35 or whatever it may be. So we help people to obtain health care, obtain pulmonary rehabilitation, obtain some additional benefits, cash benefits too, that they can put away and maybe come up with a plan for going back to school or going to get a second degree, or their spouse may do that. I sit and talk with a lot of miners about, hey, you're getting sick. We're going to protect you, but if you may not be able to work around the mines until you're 65, and so I do a lot of talking and thinking with people about how to protect them. We file wage grievances. If anybody cuts their overtime or takes anything from them just because they're getting sick, boom, we'll be right in court, and we're going to defend those guys. But I will also really try to talk with them about, how does this fit into the broader situation of your life now that you have this disease, and how can we help you to move on with being a productive citizen and help your family and everything without sacrificing your basic, your lungs in the process. So it's a really meaningful work to me, and it's hard because everybody thinks they're 10 feet tall and bulletproof when they're 25 years old, and it's hard for people to reckon with the fact they have contracted a fatal disease at such a tender age. But I think many young people in the mines are learning this is happening to people all around them. And I'd like to talk with you more about the effects and the benefits of organizing, because when one miner at one mine stands up and protects himself and transfers to a less dusty job and obtains medical care and benefits, that shows all the other miners on the same section who were breathing the same air and invariably have a similar sort of disease, that they have They have a problem on their hands and they have remedies available to them and they can stick up together and demand better. So that's a bit, it's happening. The disease is there, it's affecting very young minors. But the good news is that minors understand they have so much power and they're standing up together. And Lord willing, we're saving a lot of lives in the process.
Do you even see among non-union miners a kind of solidarity within the ranks?
Absolutely. Those miners have fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers now who came up working in the mines, and they understand about the Battle of Blair Mountain. And thanks in part to the Mine Wars Museum. This history is very near to the consciousness of our people. And, they understand that all these laws were written in real blood and they were written in the blood of people who they knew who were just a generation or two removed from them. And they're working non-union a lot of in a contracting industry where you don't have hundreds of mines up the Coal River Valley like you did 30, 40 years ago. People uh, it's harder to organize. But hey, they are organizing. The union has organized new collective bargaining units in Southern West Virginia just very recently, and the coal companies are fighting them tooth and nail. So we want people to organize, and they are organizing with the union, and they're going to keep doing that more and more and more. But even in these folks who are stuck in a non-union situation, they know where they came from, and I think they are using their collective power as much as they perceive that they can at the moment. And their lives are on the line, so they should do everything they can for themselves.
Absolutely. And one thing I hear from miners too, that mining is the only thing I know. So for those that, that don't want to be retrained and things like that, there's Part 90. Will you tell us about that?
Right. Well, Part 90 is a reference to a part of the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 20, Part 90 of the Code of Federal Regulations, provides some very powerful rights. It's actually starts from the Mine Act. In the Federal Mine Act, there is an anti-discrimination provision. It's 30 USC Section 938 of the Federal Code of the law of the statutes of the United States. Um, and it says you can't discriminate against a miner because they have pneumoconiosis, and you have to protect those miners so they don't get any sicker. And what that means in practice, this federal law says the minute that a coal miner has a positive x-ray for stage 1 simple black lung disease, you're just beginning to develop disease, you've shifted. You're in a high risk column now because you already have scarring in your lungs. Under the Federal Mine Act, those miners with stage 1 beginning to develop black lung have the right to demand a job transfer at the same mine on the same shift with the same pay. And they can continue working at that mine as long as the mine is there. And if the coal company closes down that mine and transfers the workforce up the road or to a different job, they better give that miner, the Part 90 miner, the very same transfer opportunity that they gave to everybody else. And, you know, these are all extremely hardworking people. When you're a Part 90 miner, you don't do as much physical labor anymore. Part 90 can get to be a little bit boring for people because you're basically riding a forklift in the yard. And I've talked to a lot of miners who said, I've been doing this for 5 years and I'm bored out of my mind. I'm not running a miner machine anymore. So these rights, a lot of times, these rights are things that people use because they're blindsided by getting black lung. They're scared and they are upset and they say, I don't want this to kill me. So I use Part 90 for 3 or 4 years, 5 years, until I'm maybe bored out of my mind and want to go on and take the save up a little bit and go to nursing school or go to get my different type of certification, a welding certification or whatever it may be, to go do other types of work. I see very few miners that transfer under Part 90 and work 20 years on the surface. Um, loading pallets in the warehouse. That's not what people want to do. But it is a very powerful way to take control of your health and your situation, protect your wages, And then it usually takes a human being 3 to 5 years to figure out what they're doing with their life. I know that, speaking for myself, anytime I've had to make a big life decision, it takes a few years to figure it out. So this is kind of how the Mine Act is so wise in giving people these rights to take some time. When you learn that you've gotten sick, you can put the brakes on any further exposure, transfer out. They cannot cut your regularly scheduled overtime. Many miners are accustomed to working a 10-hour shift for years. Nobody used Part 90 because the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration would let coal companies eliminate all your overtime, and people wind up losing 25-30% of their wages when they lose 2 hours of daily overtime. And so we've I have litigated a bunch of grievances to clarify and strengthen the law around Part 90, and just to clarify what the Mine Act itself always intended. And these miners now, they know that when they transfer, they're protected, their wages, their shift, and their job location. Um, and we're seeing a lot of people use it. I think hundreds of miners over the last 4 or 5 years have used Part 90, and many of them on this sort of transitional basis. And it works great, and it helps people. And it's, Lord willing, like I say, saving a lot of lives.
That's something that I wanted to touch on too was the fact that there are laws in place, um, but you exist. Why? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So laws are not being followed, and people in the legal field like you have to fight for those rights, for those laws to be upheld and respected.
Well, if democracy and civil society were just a self-executing thing, it would be beautiful. But unfortunately, there's a lot of money on the line, and these coal companies, some of them are just looking for any way to turn a quicker buck. And the almighty dollar has always been more important to a coal company than
That's
any
nothing
human being.
new.
And every miner knows that. No miner is confused about that. And so they know it requires a fight. And it's a fight that we are winning. And it's because our laws are strong, and because we bargained collectively and struck and picketed and walked off 1,000 mine sites from, up the Winding Gulf in Raleigh County and Mingo County, and 100 times over for 100 years, we picketed and fought to create this system of laws. But we have the protections now, and a lot of people are using them. And um, and but it doesn't mean that it just all happens on its own. The coal companies fight every time. They appeal almost every award of black lung benefits, almost every time. No matter, you could have an X-ray. We often have X-rays where the black parts of the lung appear white on an X-ray because it's a negative. It's a so we have these X-rays where the lungs are white as a sheet. There's no real lung tissue left. It's all coal dust and silica dust. And coal companies will file an appeal and drag it out just to avoid paying as much as soon. This is, delay, deny, denigrate, denounce, dismiss. This is what these big companies do to working people everywhere, every time. And it's the history of the world. But we got to fight back. So unfortunately, this is why I want to say, I've made such a focus on Part 90, because to me, those cases are a fight as well, but we're fighting to keep people healthy in those cases. We're fighting to actually save lives. When you're fighting over black lung benefits, you're fighting over paying somebody for the fact that they're already totally disabled. And it's very depressing that companies fight about that. So I try to spend as much time in my life and my law practice fighting to keep people healthy and to prevent people getting sick through Part 90 and wage grievances and all the risk benefit disputes and all these things that are about getting people access to healthcare and safer working conditions. And those are the fights that matter, the most in the end, because we prevent these tragedies from happening that way.
Do you feel like if the laws we have now, if they were actually followed, do you think there would need to be further legislation?
Well, yes, because And this gets to an issue that the Black lung advocacy community and the unions have really focused on for the last 20 years. There is still in the United States of America no fixed in what they call permissible exposure limit, like an enforceable dust limit for silica concentrations, for silica dust in this country for miners. President Obama issued an economy-wide silica dust rule, which is administered by OSHA for most every type of job site other than mines. But they didn't. MSHA is always regulated separately because the Mine Safety and Health Administration regulates underground and pit mines, and the mining is just such a totally different working conditions than the ones regulated by OSHA, and very frustrating. But that administration neglected to promulgate a dust limit for silica in the mines, and so and the current administration is actively fighting against the effort to impose a silica dust limit in the mines. They're actively they've just abandoned the whole effort. It's really just horrid. But yes, we need to implement a fixed enforceable silica dust limit because although companies are violating the law by failing to ventilate properly and in a whole bunch of other ways, and consequently they are overexposing people illegally currently, the mines are not subject to a single fixed enforceable silica dust limit. And that would go a long ways to reducing the exposure if the federal Department of Labor would implement a fixed silica dust limit. And so yes, that we do need to strengthen the law, the regulations at least in that regard. So there's a lot to do in this arena. It's partially because mining constantly changes. You're cutting into the earth, the pressures change, the mineral reserves change. You have a constant evolution of regulatory needs in a mining environment. It's the most dynamic working environment that there is. There's water, there's pressure, there's wind, there's just every conceivable complicating factor and risk. And so you have to continually update and revise your regulations to meet the needs of the moment. And we really need this silica rule. It would empower the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and it would give a clear marker and what do they call it? Sort of set the goalposts for the industry itself, and say, this is what we're expecting you to achieve. You've got to measure and monitor yourselves to obtain X concentration of silica dust in your operations. And we're not telling them that right now. They're not really held to any particular standard for engineering the airflow to exhaust silica from a mine. So anyway,
Well, let's
that's a lot to say. We do need stronger laws, for sure.
well, let's talk about the silica rule that was passed under the previous administration that has now been stalled. What is that? And do you think that there is an opportunity to still implement it?
Well, there's no opportunity to implement it right now because the administration has said they don't intend to implement it. And, the White House and the Secretary of Labor have the discretion to rescind regulations. And that's what they've done basically here. So it's very sad because we watch every day. I'm talking to miners who are going underground and getting severe silicosis and double lung transplants. And we're sending probably, I don't know, somewhere on the order of a dozen miners a month, I would estimate, up to Kentucky and Ohio and all these
Just
big
your
lung.
practice alone.
No, well, no, with the state of West Virginia.
Okay.
I don't know. I've tried. I have asked the federal government to give us data on the rate of lung transplants for miners, and they haven't given it to us yet. I'm pushing, and you're trying to use the Freedom of Information Act to get that information. But I'm estimating based on what I see about the incidence of disease and the incidence of lung transplants. So I'm trying to get some real data on that, but But I'm telling you, we are sending a lot of people to surgeries that are sometimes successful, but not always. And I've represented a family that lost a loved one on the operating table at a lung transplant proceeding, and it's just really horrible. That miner didn't even know that he had black lung. He was young, that his lung was young enough that your lung function can, like, when you're young and you have a lot of black lung, you still have many good parts of lung tissue. And so you don't feel the lung function loss. You can sort of force the air through the good parts of your lung. And it's usually as your body starts to age and you hit your mid 30s or your early 40s. I'm 40, about to turn 42. I can tell you, your body starts slowing down on you a little bit when you hit that age. I got to go twice as much at the gym just to stay, in any kind of shape. But that the same thing happens to your lungs. Your lung tissue can't overcome all that dust you've been carrying around. So a lot of these guys have very serious lung disease. They don't necessarily realize it, or they're a little short of breath, but they ignore it. They're 38. They think, I can't be getting black lung. And the next thing you know, they are on the operating table getting a double lung transplant. So my point is, the administration knows this is an active, huge, ongoing crisis that's just killing significant numbers of working miners, and they they have every bit of power to implement this rule, or even a stronger rule, which they really need to do. But they've just made a policy choice. They don't care to do it. They want to do anything possible to, I guess, uh, make life easier or bolster the bottom line for a couple of mining companies.
Kind of want to talk about like emotions here for a second. How did you feel when that silica rule was officially passed? Was there hope?
Well, I was cautiously optimistic. There's a lot of reason to be cynical about the ability of the federal government to do anything about this problem, and I think a lot of miners are kind of skeptical about whether MSHA is ever going to do anything to help them. MSHA could have. I mean, in 1975, the Centers for Disease Control recommended officially that we establish a fixed exposure limit of 50 micrograms of silica dust per cubic meter. And it has been 50 years. And EMSA has sat there and not done any. They could have promulgated that rule under Nixon, under Ford, under Carter, under Reagan, under Bush Senior, or Bill Clinton, or Bush Jr., or how many presidents have come and gone and not done this? So, people, miners on really reasonably may question whether MSHA actually intends to do anything for them on this issue. So I was cautiously optimistic, but I tell you what, that rule would have given us a planning process. It would have given us some fixed limits that we could at least measure and attempt to enforce. And the only way that you make progress really fighting for working people is just to fight and fight again every step of the way, every time. So the rule itself was not going to magically change things. It's not going to change the culture of the Mine Safety and Health Administration, which militated against this rule for 50 years. But it would have established some parameters that then miners themselves, by striking, by refusing to work in unsafe conditions, by organizing, miners themselves could have made this thing successful. They could have made progress. They could have leveraged and demanded better protections using this new framework. And now we've lost the chance for the union and miners to make that advancement for themselves.
And I want to talk about, you know, the fight in general. You see all these harrowing things. You talk to all of these people who are dealing with one of the worst, circumstances someone can deal with. How do you keep the fight going? How do you not get discouraged?
Well, I do get discouraged, but I I tell you, it's the history of the world that the extremely powerful people and organizations like big businesses and and it used to be the trading companies and the crown, and now it's multinational corporations. They keep trying to take and take and take more and more from the rest of society. And shouldn't get too discouraged so long as you have a way to speak freely. You have the freedom to organize. You have the freedom to associate, to teach one another our history, and to educate and empower people in society to stand up together to protect themselves and their families. And that we do have the freedom of association in this country, the freedom of assembly, the right to organize. Um, it's under attack, but those are rights that we have. And so it's a very precious and special moment in human history that we have those rights, and those rights are carefully delineated in our laws. So I stay hopeful because I'm living in a special time of history where by engaging in this system, we can protect the rights of the mass majority of humanity, by organizing and educating one another. And that's a special thing. And it's a use it or lose it kind of a thing. And that relates to voting in society, that relates to organizing in society. You got to use it or lose it. And so that gives me hope when I see people engaging and using these very precious rights that people fought and died to win, from Blair Mountain to the Revolutionary War, and everything in between. That should give us hope, because the only way that we're going to hold on to those blessed achievements that this country should be very proud to have brought forth in human history is if we use them and we give people a reason to continue believing in these systems. If we don't use these rights, people will think that it's all a false promise and that democracy really isn't, it's more than it's cracked up to be. What has it really done for us? And some people are already believing that. Some people already think, I'd rather just take a mid-grade paying job for a big company that doesn't care a lick about me, because I don't believe I'm going to get anything better uh, working in a union or sticking my neck out for my own health and safety on the job. People are already starting to give up on these rights. And that is the real depressing thing. That's the thing that does make me very despondent. But conversations with folks like you and all the people that are watching your podcast and trying to stay educated and understand these evolving challenges, that gives me immense hope. And I'm really just honored to get to be here with you. This conversation gives me immense hope because it's going to live on your podcast, and people will learn and watch it and take heart and tell their children and their grandchildren, about how important it is to fight for one another everywhere, every time. Hallelujah.
You're preaching there.
Yeah. Well,
How did you get into this line of work, and what changes, if any, have you seen in the landscape of your work since beginning your practice?
well, let's see. I started off. I was born in Morgantown, and my mom's from Greenbrier County, more far southern, Nicholas Greenbrier areas. My dad's from up in Altoona, PA, railroad country, and they met up around Morgantown. So that's where I came into the picture, and I went off to college. I worked in AmeriCorps Vista in Wyoming County, and there's a long history of Vista workers working with miners in Wyoming County, organizing. That's where a lot of the wildcat strikes started. That gave rise to the black lung compensation system. So it's a very important place for workers' rights as well as Mingo County. Uh, so the I got started there. I was not a lawyer. I just graduated college. I worked for a while in the legislature, worked for Senator Byrd as the U.S. Senate. I went up there to work for Senator Byrd after the Sago mine disaster, and the Congress was trying to legislate. They recognized Technology had improved. We needed to revisit the Mine Act and update things. And so I got the opportunity to work on mine safety um, for a little while there in Washington. And then I became sort of frustrated with the congressional process and felt like we needed to get back to primary organizing. And that even, we raised a lot of money for MSHA, for the review commission that oversees mine safety penalties. We hired a lot more judges to adjudicate federal black lung cases to try to speed up the process. The Congress did in that era. But even still, even with all that, if you're not there fighting in the trenches on the ground, um, these systems grind to a halt and nothing gets done. So that's when I decided, after a few years working in DC and getting frustrated and feeling sort of bound and gagged in the basement of the United States Senate, that we were moving billions of dollars, but things weren't changing on the ground in America. So that's when I decided to come home. I went to law school then, and sort of went to law school a little bit later in my career, and now I've been practicing representing coal miners and working people for the last 15, 16 years in West Virginia.
Well, I think that's a great story of how to not get discouraged and to find your lane into doing something meaningful. If there's an issue you're passionate about like this, you found a way to actually materially make a difference.
Well, I hope so, but you never have to. You can never let up, and so I've been able to grow my law practice. If there are people who are watching this who have an interest in getting involved in advocating for workers in Appalachia or anywhere else in the country, I talk to people that are working for shepherds in the Rockies and miners in the Indian native, tribal lands out west, and anybody that's interested in kind of getting into this sort of community-based uh, labor law and advocacy. I'd be glad to bring them to my office or talk to them or meet up with them. I really want to actively share what the union and 100 great miners have taught me over the years. And I'm heading into my 40s. It takes a good 10 years to really have develop a capability to do this kind of work in a meaningful, sustained way. So I'm thinking already 10 years from now, I'm going to be in my early 50s. I got to start finding more young people to bring along and bring into what I'm doing. And you all do a great job of that with the Mine Wars Museum. I know you've got a constant flow of young people coming in, getting work, getting educated, being inspired, and finding ways to dedicate their lives to the preservation of this democratic heritage, this heritage of, with a lowercase d, I'm saying, our heritage of organizing and democracy in this country requires constant um, mentorship and training and learning and coalition building. So that's kind of what I'm focused on, and I hope this maybe somebody that watches this podcast will give me a call or stop by the office and keep it going for another 100 generations.
Absolutely. And it sounds like to me the first thing is knowledge, and the second thing is action. Someone who's listening who maybe doesn't feel like they are necessarily most potent in the legal field, what do you think they can do to advocate for this issue?
Well, you don't need to be a lawyer to advocate for coal miners. You need to have a certain amount of education about the mines and the law, and the medical issues. But we have a lot of people who come out of the medical field who want to get involved in medical legal counseling. There is one of the great things that the Affordable Care Act did is it vastly expanded the network of community health centers around the country. And community health centers are places where people can go to obtain affordable health care, but also obtain whole person care, which is helping them to uh, receive vocational rehabilitation or workers' compensation or other sorts of benefits that will help their family to remain productive and engaged in society after an injury. And so people that have medical training can do every bit as much working in a nonprofit community health setting to empower working families, so we need a lot of those as well. And so whatever your training may be, there's a place for you in helping people to protect their health and their families. And we also, I think you understand that we need artists and we need musicians. You guys have a lot of them with the Mind Wars Museum who help to tell these stories in ways that capture people's imagination and capture their attention. So um, I think they should attend this. You guys hold educational sessions, camp. What is it? You have
Camp
Camp Solidarity.
Solidarity.
Camp Solidarity is a great multidisciplinary kind of learning environment where it is knowledge and then action. That's kind of like a biblical teaching, right? You have to have knowledge, but you don't have to have any particular type of rarefied legal or doctoral knowledge. You have to put yourself in a setting where you have access to knowledge, where you're in a learning environment, and you have a great forum for doing that there. And then people can find, given their background, their interests, their skills, where can I add the most value? Where can I take action most beneficially? So
So it
that's
sounds to
what I,
me you look at, hey, what am I good at, and how does that filter through this cause?
absolutely. And there's room for everybody. Whether you're inclined to do legal work, that's great. You can do legal work, you can do paralegal work, you can interview witnesses and help develop. I mean, a lot of what we do as lawyers is figuring out the truth of what has happened in a very complicated situation. And that takes time and effort and a lot of manpower in many cases to interview people and go through records. And so we have legal assistants and paralegals who do a lot of that work, along with us and reaching out, trying to track down witnesses and get people together to figure out, okay, how can we determine and explain to a third party like a judge what really happened up at this mine on, the backside of Gilbert Creek 5 years ago when this guy was fired over a dispute on top of a strip mine. It's hard, it's challenging to reconstruct something like that. And so a lot of different types of expertise comes into it. But I think I would urge people to participate in things like Camp Solidarity, get involved in the union movement, attend the labor college or the labor extension service, which holds education sessions around the state to help people to gain the kind of primary knowledge that will enable them to match their skills and their interests with a way to support labor rights and union organizing in our region. And then whether it's through the extension service or the Mind Wars Museum or the union movement itself, people have a lot of gateways to get involved in advocating for working families. And I hope more and more people do.
That Thank you so much, Sam. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add on anything that we've touched on today?
No, I totally lost track of time. I really enjoyed talking to you. So I hope we haven't gone over too much or anything or
We keep
under or
it loose. We
whatever.
keep it loose. You're fine.
Um, I'm just, I, I talked a lot about the Hawks Nest disaster, because that was basically a time in West Virginia in the early 30s when we were mining sandstone to develop hydroelectric tunnels over in Fayette County. And hundreds, probably over 500, maybe as many as 700 or more miners died of acute and accelerated silicosis. Uh,
Majority black too.
Majority black, and who were already working there under really barbaric working conditions, living in tents and camps where guarded by, you know, armed guards, forcing them up into the mines, working in extremely dusty, unventilated, minimally ventilated conditions. And that was 100 years ago. And we have workers in West Virginia today working with the same kind of uh, you know, legal situation. No exposure limit, no silica dust protection, and dying. And thank goodness, we haven't seen those mass uh, fatalities in a single mine at all at once like they did at Hawks Nest. But It's happening to hundreds of miners around us right now. And I think as we get together the epidemiology, and it's going to be a post-mortem, but we're going to look back on this decade and say we've lived through another type of Hawks Nest disaster with hundreds, maybe thousands of miners by the end of this, getting extremely sick, sadly, many of them dying. And um, we can't we we can't let that happen. Till we've got to put an end to it. It's been 100 daggone years, and I hope that your efforts will bring more people to greater awareness to stand up together and demand better from our government and from one another. Because it does fall on the shoulders of working people at the end of the day to organize and use the rights that our families and our forefathers have fought to give us. So I hope people will stay engaged in that and understand that things are not going to get better unless we do it, unless we organize and demand better for ourselves and our children. So that's we can't tell people enough. We as Senator Paul Wellstone from Minnesota used to say, we all do better when we all do better. So you may be working in a union mine, but you need to be out there picketing down the road with your non-union cousin who needs your help, needs your strength, standing there behind them. We've got to support our neighbors. We've got to be good neighbors by showing up and demanding better for each other. And it will help our whole society because we'll have less sickness, less early disease and death and labor force loss and degradation of our economy through this decline that we are dealing with in the coal industry right now. So I hope people will never give up.
Well, I thank you so much, Sam. I found this to be a really invigorating and inspiring conversation, and I hope that those that are listening feel that way. And if this talk has inspired you, the listener, the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum invites you to an upcoming event regarding Black Lung. It's on June 20th at the museum in Matewan at 3 p.m. We're holding a gallery opening with speakers for our new exhibit in the museum's Solidarity Gallery titled Entirely Preventable: The Toxic Legacy of Silica Dust from Hawk's Nest to Black Lung. It's curated by Stacy Kranitz. The gallery explores the invisible but deadly legacy of silica dust exposure through the work of three photographers, Kranitz, Earl Daughter, and Raymond Thompson Jr. It's set against the backdrop of historic and contemporary labor activism, tracing a long arc of resistance from the 1930s Hawks Nest tunnel disaster to the fight to implement federal silica regulations today. The exhibition is both a remembrance and a call to action. Speakers include Chris Williamson, former Assistant Secretary to the Mine Safety and Health Administration, who was instrumental in the passage of the Silica Rule, Evan Smith, Advocacy Director at Apple Red Legal Aid, who has been fighting in the courts for miners' Black Lung benefits for over a decade, members of UMWA Local 1440, who worked with their fellow union members to author a bill that would create a state Black Lung benefits program. Gary Hairston, president of the National Black Lung Association, who has testified before Congress and protested at the headquarters of the Labor Department, urging the current administration to enforce the Silica Rule, and Pulitzer Prize award-winning photographer Stacy Kranitz. You can support the museum's work by becoming a member at wvminewars.org/join. This comes with some fabulous perks, including a subscription to our upcoming journal, all centered around the topic of Black Lung, link in the episode description. We're also WV Mine Wars on all social media, so keep up with us there and learn more about, well, really everything on our website, wvminewars.org. Also, if you're listening to this in podcast format, but would like to see our faces, watch the video over on the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum YouTube page. Please subscribe to us wherever you are listening. It really helps us get these important conversations to larger audiences. This has been Mine Wars Forum. We'll see you next time. Solidarity forever.